In this sample video, we can see two people talking. There are three cameras covering the action, but one camera looks different than the other two. The colors are off. Video shading is extremely important in any live production because when done correctly, it allows for seamless transitions from one camera to the other without the viewer noticing any drastic changes in color temperature or exposure. This job is left to the V1 or video shader and is often called painting the cameras. Their job is to not only make sure that each camera sees each color correctly, but that all cameras are seeing the colors the same way. In this how-to video, we'll show you how it's accomplished in two parts. Let's go inside the control room to see how it's done. On the far side of our control room are two server racks that hold all the equipment needed to perform these functions. First, we have the waveform vectorscope unit at the bottom, the monitor that displays its readouts with the accompanying mouse, the CCU or brain for each of the studio cameras, and finally the three Sony RCP 3500s that physically control all of the parameters of the camera. Ensure that all of these devices, including the television monitors, are turned on. Always moving left to right, first turn on the televisions. Then server rack 1, followed by server rack 2. Repeat this same process for turning everything off, always working left to right. Before you sit down and begin to paint your cameras with the RCPs, you'll first have to go back out into the studio and orient all three cameras at the same subject, in this case, a chip chart. Under the lighting that you'll be using during your production and at full power, place the chip chart and stand where most of the action of your production will take place, usually in the center. Next, align each camera's view and zoom so that the only thing the camera sees is the black and white portions of the card, with the black square centered in the frame. Try not to get any color sections in the frame, as this will alter your calibrations. Now that all three cameras are pointed at the chip chart and framed and focused accordingly under proper lighting conditions, we'll move back into the control room. The next step is to null out the RCPs, or to put it another way, to start from scratch. We want to make sure that every knob, dial, and button is back to 0 so that we will have complete control of the parameters we're adjusting by setting a standard reference point. And in fact, that's one of the buttons we'll be pressing in just a minute, standard. If any of the following steps become too confusing or disorienting, just remember that there is a handy cheat sheet taped to the back side of the switcher computer for reference. Now, first thing we want to do is activate the controller. Press the panel active button on the bottom left. We now have access to the panel. The panel is now on. Steps 2 through 8 on the cheat sheet are easy enough. Look at the top 3 row of buttons on the RCP. The only one that should be lit is Cam PW, or camera power. Everything else should be off. Below the onboard monitor of the RCP, you'll find another row of buttons labeled Scene Files. Make sure all of these are off as well. You don't want to accidentally be changing someone else's presets. Back to the bottom of the panel, make sure Iris MB Active is lit. This will give us control of the aperture rings inside the camera. Below that, you'll see readouts for both the Iris and Master Black. Next to these readouts are two of the same buttons, Relative. Make sure both of these are off. To the right of this, we have our controller for these parameters. Moving the joystick up and down opens and closes the Iris, while underneath the joystick is hidden a rotational dial. This controls the Master Black. Mess around with it to get a feel for what it's doing. You may have noticed that the controls are very sensitive, so let's try to tame them. Move the joystick all the way up. Just above and to the right is a small dial labeled Sense. Rotate this dial until the yellow lights to the left of the joystick are on top, and the Iris number reads 1.8. This is the highest aperture setting for our cameras. Now bring the joystick all the way to the bottom. Over to the right here, there's a control dial for this as well. It's called Close Open Course. Rotate this dial until both yellow lights and the Iris number readout say CLS. This means closed. Now, when you move the joystick from top to bottom, you'll have full range control over the aperture of the camera, but for right now, just leave it somewhere in the middle and we'll fine-tune it later. Rotate the underside dial of the joystick and put Master Black at 0.0. Above this, we have 6 dial knobs, 3 for white and 3 for black. From left to right, they control red, green, and blue. Adjust these dials so that all 6 arrows are pointed in the 12 o'clock position, and you'll feel a little indent with your fingertips to let you know that it's properly seated. Now that all of our dials are nulled out and the joystick calibrated and all auto features disengaged, it's time to tell the RCP to set everything back to 0. Or to put it another way, we want to tell the RCP that the way we have everything set right now should be the reference point. And to do this, we're going to press the standard button right here. It'll stay lit for about 4 seconds, then go out. When the light turns off, the controller is now ready to use. But keep in mind though that every time you press the standard button, in addition to resetting the controller, the RCP automatically turns on the Master Black relative button. So if you don't want this feature activated, be sure to disable it. Alright, so if you followed all the steps correctly, this is what yours should look like. And that's how you null out an RCP 3500. Simply repeat these steps for cameras 2 and 3 before moving on to the next section. Pause the video now. So now that our cameras are pointed and our RCPs are nulled and ready to use, we'll have to see what we're doing. Make sure the 4K monitor of the waveform vector scope is on and set to HDMI. With the accompanying mouse, let's select the current camera that we're working on, camera 1. Click on the home button in the bottom left. Then click on presets. Within this presets menu, there are 6 different pages, A through F. There's a lot of stuff in here. Most of it you won't use, but just look through it anyways because it's good to be familiar with it. But we're looking through A. So scroll through until you find it and select Cam 1 Quad. This will bring up all things camera 1. You got the vector scope, you got the waveform, you got the double diamond in the top right, and the actual video feed of the camera in the bottom right. Now that we can see what we're doing, it's time to chart. On the top right of the RCP, press the bars button. This feeds bars and tone to the camera's electronics. In the top left window of the 4K monitor, you'll see the signal graphically represented in the waveform. Red, green, and blue color peaks should be at 100 and pure black should be at 0. Unless there is something wrong with the camera's internal components, these levels should always be the same and should not be adjusted. If something does need to be adjusted, then this is probably an indication that the camera itself is having difficulty processing these standard frequencies, in which case, call your studio engineer for maintenance. Press the bars button again to turn it off. Now press the test button just next to it. This enables the cal pulse frequency, with pure white on one side and pure black on the other. Again, refer to the waveform view of the 4K monitor on the top left. If it's too small for you, double click on it with the mouse and make it full screen. To exit full screen, double click again to go back. Our goal for this section is to have the peaks of the whites within red, green, and blue to touch 100, and to have the blacks of red, green, and blue to touch 0. To accomplish this, we'll use these 6 dials here and the rotational dial on the underside of the joystick. Now, using the underside dial of the joystick will affect all 3 colors master blacks, so do this first. Then once that's set and looks pretty decent, then use these 6 dials over here, the 3 on the top for the whites and the 3 on the bottom for the blacks. With all the levels properly set, we've officially set pure white and pure black for each of the color bands of this camera. Press the test button again to remove the cal pulse signal from the monitor. What we should be seeing now on the monitor is the chip chart itself. This is where a keen eye and the ability to play around come in handy. So far, we've set reference to the RCP controls, verified that electrical signals are being processed by the camera CCU properly by hitting bars, and we've set reference values for pure white and pure black by adjusting the RGB white and black and master black reference using the cal pulse signal. Now all that's left is to adjust the colors of the camera to the particular lighting situation, in this case, our studio lights. Using the waveform at the top left and the double diamond in the top right uses many combinations of the 6 dials and the joystick to ensure that all 3 colors on both the white and black spectrums are touching 100 and 0 respectively, while at the same time the vertical line running through the center of the double diamond is as straight as possible while still reaching the edges of the diamond tips. Be sure not to crush your colors. Get your colors as close to the line as possible, but without making them flatline. See, this is no good. You're crushing your colors. You need to back off a little bit. There you go. That looks good. Alright, once you feel like your colors are as good as you can get them, move on to the next camera and the next camera after that until all 3 cameras are completed. You have to do each camera individually before moving on to the next step. Pause the video now. Congratulations, you've made it to the final section. For this final section, you'll need to use the switcher. Enable a vertical wipe transition and set camera 1 to program and set camera 2 to preview. Use the transition lever here and wipe between the 2 video signals and stop in the middle. There you go, something like this. Adjust the cameras 1 and 2 against each other and do the same with cameras 2 and 3. Then do it with cameras 1 and 3. Any and all combinations will have to be tested until you feel that all 3 cameras look the same, both in intensity of whites and blacks, but also in their representations of the colors red, green, and blue. You might even want to have a fresh pair of eyes help you judge your progress thus far, because staring at the same screen for quite a while can become frustrating. If you feel like you're stuck, or if you've lost reference at any point, simply go back to bars and cow pulse and reset your reference, and you'll find in time that you were never really that far off. There we go. Nice. So once you get all 3 cameras looking as good as possible in reference to each other, pat yourself on the back and move on to the next stage of your production. There we go. That looks pretty decent.